Hello, and I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to record a video today about a topic which is very dear to me, which is how to make decisions. And I mean that really quite generally, not any specific type of decision, not decisions even in any specific field, but how to choose in one's life in general. Faculties, methods that help with this. This is something I've thought about quite deeply, really for my whole life, and something I've struggled with for my whole life. And in the past several years, I would say, something I've made great gains around, and I now feel fairly confident in my ability to make decisions and how I go about it. So in this video, I want to talk about that, about my method itself. I want to talk about why it works, and I want to talk about what I think it means that it works. In other words, what are the philosophical implications, or what do we learn through recognizing that this is an effective method of making decisions? So I want to share about all of those three things, but I'm going to start by talking about sort of the opposite, which is how not to make decisions, a method of decision making that does not work. And I think it's important to talk about this because, in my opinion, the way in which we are taught to make decisions in this culture fundamentally does not work. And so it sets us up for a lot of hardship, heartbreak, and really a lack of understanding of ourselves. What we gain through successful decision-making and through reflection is deep understanding of ourselves. So I want to first talk about what doesn't work, why it doesn't work, and then through that I'll lead into effective decision-making methods and the implications thereof. Really beautiful day here in New Mexico, but starting to dip toward winter. So it's kind of overcast, probably going to rain, maybe even while I'm doing this. So just a bit of a grounding note about the environment. So how are we taught to make decisions in this culture? Probably anybody watching this video has heard about, pro and con lists, or thinking about what's at stake in the decision, what's the worst outcome if I choose option A versus option B. And you've probably experimented with these as well. These are very rational or logical methods that we might even be taught in school, right? Put choice A in one column, put choice B in another, and think of as many benefits as you can to choice A and as many drawbacks, and the same for choice B, and so on and so forth. And the hope is that the evidence for one option will kind of outweigh that for another, and that rationally or logically you'll be forced into one option. Okay, this is the way to do it. This is the way to go. This is the best option for me. I want to talk about several reasons why this doesn't work, and why really this just creates more confusion than clarity. A different way of putting this is that it enables confusion. One reason is that we're purely using our mind, disconnected from any emotional impulse here. And for that reason, we'll always be able to think of more pros, more cons for whichever option, even if we're just making them up. So, I might, let's say I'm thinking about moving to one city versus another, right? And I go, city A is less expensive than city B. But city B is going to have a better social life, right? City A is closer to my parents, right? And that's important to me. But I have more friends in city B. Or maybe even being away from my parents becomes a positive, depending on how I'm feeling about my parents. So our mind is always going to be able to invent more reasons, or even spin things in a different way, depending on, again, our emotional impulse, which is what's really driving this process. And the main thing I want to illuminate here is that when we use these purely mental processes, such as a pro-con list, such as thinking about what's at risk, the worst case scenario for each option, we are acting from emotional impulses, usually without recognizing it. Another way you can clearly see this, and this is a bit of an aside, is through politics. We just had an election. Isn't it the case that whether they won or lost, and regardless of which party they belong to, each side believes that they have the facts? They authentically believe that the other side is deluded, my side has the evidence, if only they would use their minds, they would understand. This is perfect proof of the reality that we can dredge up whatever facts, whatever reasons, for whatever we want to prove. And really the impetus is coming from some emotionality underneath. Quite famously in philosophy, some rigorous European philosophers, Immanuel Kant, David Hume come to mind. They began to expose this interconnection of reason and emotion. Previously, it was thought by, the European men who headed this movement that philosophy was made up of pure reason, and anyone who followed these propositions would reach the same conclusion, right? And I would be correct. And they would know it by force of reason. And it began to be discovered that underneath reason, there was always at the level of the heart or gut some attempt to persuade others for the sake that I myself might feel correct, more secure, to rationalize what I already want to do, to create a set of proofs for it, even though what I want to do is what is truly driving me. And ultimately, this eventuated in the state of philosophy we've now had for several generations, which is what's known as postmodernism or post-structuralism, where it's recognized that if something appears to be true, that's simply owing to the amount of force behind it. So I'll give you an example. Look at the U.S. electoral system as a whole. Regardless of whether we're voting Democrat or Republican, one thing we're going to get reinforced from basically all media sources is that these are two options, and one of them is right and one of them is wrong. And so any thinking outside of that box becomes increasingly difficult. So from a postmodern or post-structuralist lens, if it seems to us that the two-party electoral system we've inherited in the US is the only possibility, that's not because logically or rationally it is so, but rather because this is the only argument we see. Which is to say there is a quantity of force or power behind it which prevents it from being removed, which prevents alternatives from arising. So throughout the history of philosophy, just to recap, we've gone from a place where it was believed that reason could be separated from emotion and that people could be purely reasonable, to one where it's recognized that the two are always intertwined, and if something appears reasonable, appears factual, it's merely because it's being more forcibly presented to us. So this is a crisis of philosophy that has culminated in our current state, or our current epoch. Something else I want to acknowledge here, and this is another aside, is that whenever we hear this idea of I have the facts, or I'm being reasonable, you're being emotional, there's also a deeply noxious history being evoked, which is one of sexism, racism, nationalism, so on and so forth. I mentioned European philosophers earlier. They always contrasted themselves with generally darker skinned peoples they construed as savages, whom they thought to be emotional rather than reasonable, or superstitious rather than scientific. These dichotomies still live on today. You can see them in the labeling of skepticism of things like vaccines as, anecdotal rather than scientific. Anecdotal really means you're acting from emotion, or it's a first person account rather than something coming from authority. You can see it in the dismissal of anyone who gets overly emotional about an election result as hysterical. Hysteria was a term that was used to really pathologize the emotions of women. And by the way, these emotions were coming as a legitimate response to the oppression of men. So anyway, my whole purpose in this section of this video is just to show us, A, reason cannot be separated from emotion, and B, the attempt to do so is the extension of a deeply oppressive, wrong-headed history, which still lives with us and which we're still working through. Okay. So if reason cannot be separated from emotion, and if when we even decide to prove something, it is in fact driven by an emotional impulse, right? Think not only about the proof itself. Oh, I have this great philosophical proof that, the earth is round, but think about the emotional motive behind it. Why is it that you're drawn to write that proof as opposed to any other? What is at risk for you? What are you feeling threatened by that brings you to undertake this action? So if that is the case, that reason cannot be separated from emotion, then how do we go about making decisions? We've been taught our whole lives in this culture, use your mind, think ahead, plan ahead, worry about the worst case scenarios, try to seize on the long-term benefits. If we set all of this aside, what is left? Well, it's that emotionality, that inner impulse. Our gut and our heart really do know what is right for us. And we can learn to listen to them, and we can set aside the rationalizations of the mind, which really come after the fact. What the mind is really attempting to do when we write something like a pro-con list is prove the correctness of our emotional impulse so that we feel less insecure. Because simply to say, I want to do it because I want to do it, is quite vulnerable and leaves us more open to being labeled as crazy or impulsive or whatever by other people, right? There's a big difference between saying, I want to move to Australia because, I've looked into this grad program they have and it's the best in my field and here are all these metrics. There's a big difference between saying that and I want to move to Australia because I feel called there and I don't know why. The latter is going to put us at much greater likelihood of judgment by other people. What else did I want to say? There was something I wanted to say when I was talking about just accepting emotionality and being judged. Oh, so usually when we talk about this, when we talk about, just acquiesce to the emotions, just be in your heart and your gut and trust those, a fear comes up. And this is a mind-based fear. This is owing to the history in our culture of religious oppression, really, of the emotions, of the instincts that we've all lived with. You may think if you've never gone to a religious school, say you've gone to college and it wasn't a religious college, you may think that you've had a secular education. But the truth is that the origins of education itself are in religion. And this is why we have things like grading. We originally had corporal punishment. Now we have exclusion from other students when a student is punished. All of these were meant to work out the original sin of the soul and replace it with goodness. The foundational impetus or ethos of education is that we need to be taught how to be good, which is a notion that comes from the Bible, from Catholicism. So we've all been trained in this way. We've all been trained following my feelings is bad. I might do something wrong. I need to master them with my with my mind. And even more so, my desires are wrong, right? And so this is the pushback that usually arises when we talk about following our feelings. Well, if I obey my desires, if I take them seriously, I'm going to kill people. I'm going to rape people. I'm going to become a lewd masturbator or a pedophile or whatever. We fear that that sort of evil, which again is a religious notion, lives within us and is going to be unleashed. So we have to control it with our mind. Another aside, but this too doesn't work. If you try to stanch your desire to drink just by force, well, I'm not going to drink because it's irrational, the behavior will reemerge with stronger force. It needs to be substituted with the community, the belonging, the spirituality for which there's really a longing. So again, that's an aside. But people will say, right, something bad is going to happen. I'm going to harm people if I follow my impulses. And the truth is, this is not the case. Another philosopher, Plato, alluded to this, millennia ago, that ultimately the pleasurable and the good, the moral, align or converge. And I submit, if we really follow our hearts, follow our desires, all of us will encounter this, will prove this to ourselves through experience in the end. So I'll use the example of sexuality, right? Before I've had any sexual experience, it might seem very attractive to me to have a one-night stand with a lot of people, right? And maybe I'm going to seek out people I take to be good looking or popular in my social sphere. And that's going to be my only sort of criterion, because I want to achieve that social benefit that's going to come from accruing these tally marks. What I'll find with time is that, first of all, one-night stands are inherently dissatisfying. They make me feel lonely. They make me feel undervalued because I'm attesting that I'm only worth one night with a person, not worth long-term commitment. And also, as I seek out people for superficial reasons, how they look, how popular they are, etc., there's guaranteed to be a mismatch with my true needs. And so a deeper part of me will be underwhelmed. I will feel I'm not really being met emotionally. I'm not really being seen. And so there will be an ache that the sex alone cannot satiate. And so through following this pleasure impulse, right, at first I'm just going to sleep with a lot of people because it's going to make me feel good. We discover deeper desires, which are actually more stabilizing and more beneficial, not only for ourselves, but for society. I've reached the point where I won't even have a one-night stand anymore, or even a fling, if such an opportunity arises. I want deep commitment. I want to build something durable and real with someone, because that is what makes me feel whole on the soul level, right? And so my pleasure is now aligned with what our society would deem morally good. So I could approach marriage in two ways, right? I could say, well, I need to get married because it's what our society says is right, and having flings and being a bachelor is wrong. And I'm still going to live with this schism inside where I wonder, what would it be like to have flings? What would it be like to have a one-night stand? But I won't allow myself because of my internalized shame. I could do that, or I could reach the position where I am now, in which authentically I do not want that which society would deem immoral. There's no longer a draw there, right? And so as Plato said, the pleasurable and the good ultimately align. They ultimately converge. This is starting to be a longer video than I thought, but what the heck, I guess I have a lot to say. So that was just a caveat, a pushback that often arises when we talk about following our feelings. And I showed why ultimately it's a moot point. So, what are some techniques for how to follow our feelings, how to tune into our heart? There are many. And I want to say first, getting into our bodies usually requires a healing process. Part of the reason so many of us are mind identified in this society and might appeal to things like pro-con lists when it comes to decision making is that our society as a whole is traumatizing. It damages our bodies, it damages our perceptions of self through trauma incurred in the body, and so we flee to the refuge of the mind and we disassociate from our body. It's actually normative in our culture, unfortunately, to be disidentified from our body. And yeah, this is because getting back into the body means processing and releasing the negative things that happened to me as a child and later. There are many technologies through which to do this. Some from which I've benefited include yoga, somatic therapy. Meditation is very direct, so I actually wouldn't recommend it as a starting point. Trauma and fear-based responses can come up very, very quickly, and there's sort of nowhere to hide from them. We might concentrate more on our diet. We might walk around in nature. I'm parked at a nature site right now. We might engage in rituals. We might gather with groups of friends, right? We have women's circle, men's circle, whatever, and just openly discuss our feelings. There's sort of innumerable ways to begin getting back into the body and into the wisdom of the body. What do I want? What feels right? What feels good for me? More specifically for decision making, we might try something called the body pendulum. So I want you, if you're watching this video, to pause the video after I give these instructions and try this. Stand up and stand as straight as you can, and close your eyes and say yes and see what happens, and then wait and then say no and see what happens, and then come back to this video. So what should have happened is with the yes, you felt yourself fall forward. The heart feels when I'm invited, when I'm safe, when something is expansive for me, I'm going to move toward it. And with the no, you fall backwards. The heart contracts. The body feels, uh-oh, there's a threat. Using this same technique of the body pendulum, we can issue statements and gauge their veracity. Our body will tell us whether or not this is right for me or true. So I can say, it's in my best interest to move out of the state this year, and my body will fall forward or back. Or I can say, it's in my best interest to start a relationship with this person. Or even, I want to start a relationship with this person, testing what my desires are, if not, what would be right for me. And the body will tell me yes or no. Body might also respond maybe, right? There might be some uncertainty. Sometimes that can indicate resistance. Maybe I don't want to know my body's truth. Sometimes that can indicate true uncertainty. Maybe the body isn't sure. And sometimes that indicates that our sensing organism is very nuanced, and other times it has yet to become more nuanced, more refined. But using this technique can help us tune in more and more greatly and ubiquitously to the truth of our body, what would be good for us. Similarly, you might speak a first-person statement about a potential reality and simply track how you feel in your body. So let's say I'm looking at, I have a choice between two jobs, and they're at two different schools, right? And let's say one of them's a public school and one of them's a charter school. I say to myself, I'm teaching at the public school, and see how I feel. I'm teaching at the charter school, and see how I feel. Again, we're isolating the heart here. Where does my heart feel more open, more alive, more in tune with what I take to be the truth of my being? And where does it feel a contraction? You know, this is going back for me. This isn't really what would be the greatest expression of who I am. Which of course is part of what we're here to do. We have been created by some process, whether natural, spiritual, or otherwise, and to shrink back from our nature is almost a rebuke to that creative force. Instead, we are here to fully express, to flower as who we are. And this process of tuning into the body helps us know that. I want to talk about, helps us achieve that. I want to talk about two other things, and I'm kind of deciding which would be the right order. One is the philosophical implications of what I've described. So choice making works most effectively when we forget the mind and tune into our hearts, our guts, our desires. What does that mean? And the second thing is some methods of evaluating whether we've made the right decision for us, because we can make mistakes too. I think I want to do them in that order that I just presented. So, if decision-making is kind of a fruitless enterprise when we appeal solely to the mind, and if it works more fluidly and to our benefit when we trust our emotions and our hearts and abandon the need for reason, because again, this is really just an effort to prove to others, that what we're doing is correct, acceptable. It's a desire to attain security within the social sphere, which is fine. That's something we need. But I would submit it is rarely the best agenda item to foreground when making a decision for yourself. Better is what is going to help you fully flower and express yourself as a being. And as I've shown, this will be in tune with the needs of the whole, because the pleasurable and the good ultimately synchronize. So, what does it imply that the best route to decision making is to abandon the follies of the mind? One thing is that we have less choice than we think, because while I can choose what I think, and I can come up with all of the reasons for the pro-con list on either side, and I can invent very clever proofs to demonstrate whatever I like, I cannot change, I cannot control what is in my heart, what is in my gut, right? As I've discussed earlier, you cannot change your desire for alcohol or some other drug. Perhaps you can substitute it with a deeper desire, which it was really serving to sort of distract you from. But you cannot change that it's there. In love, you cannot ultimately change whom you fall in love with, or why, or where your love proceedings go. We fall out of love sometimes, and often it's heartbreaking for us, and it's something we wish wasn't happening, but we can't we can fight against it, but we can't defeat that process. It simply happens in time. You cannot control where you feel most alive, what career is ultimately right for you, where you want to live, what sort of atmosphere, what sort of environment soothes your being. These are not things that you can choose. And so one of the consequences of making decisions in this way, where I submit to the feeling, the desire I have within me, is that I let go of the delusion that I'm in control of my life. It's a paradox. How do you choose? You let go of the belief that you have any choice. So those two things kind of happen simultaneously. And this is why choice writ large is a spiritual function. It's a function of surrender. In order to make the choice, I recognize that something has already chosen for me. It might be my heart alone. It might be my gut alone, that sort of instinct or aversion or pushback, whatever it is. It might be what in my belief system placed those values there. Where did the values in my heart come from? How did they get there? Is it explicable through evolution? Is it explicable through the God of the Bible? Is it explicable through something more esoteric like energy or soul and past lives? There's going to be some recognition and embrace of the fact that my life is dictated by some force which ultimately is out of my control. And if we truly follow this process to fruition, we come to love that force because we recognize I am placed here for a divine purpose, which is simultaneously pleasurable for me to live in tune with. That is to say, obeying my nature makes me feel good. And what a gift, right? Imagine if reality was the opposite and being our true selves came with punishment. It does come with punishment sometimes in the form of, rejection and things like that, but it's ultimately trivial compared to the pleasure of living in alignment with our real nature. So that is one of the consequences. When we accept that choice is surrender, we lose the delusion that we have control over our lives. Now, the final piece of this video is how do we evaluate the choices we have already made? Because again, sometimes we can choose erroneously. Sometimes we don't fully listen to ourselves. Sometimes we're in denial. Sometimes we act too hastily because we have anxiety about the choice, and that is clouding our ability to really sit with and attempt to investigate our truth. I've done this recently even, where it was like, this is what my body is telling me to do, I'm going to do it. And I realized later, it was a little fast and kind of impacted my life in a negative way. And sometimes our bodies will slightly mislead us, and we'll realize, that didn't really feel good for me, and next time I'm going to sit with that a little longer. Sometimes we don't know ourselves as well as we think we do. So, some methods of evaluation. One, when the choice is right for you, often you will not think about it afterward. It will pass out of the sphere of awareness because there's no longer any friction. I know that choice was in alignment with who I am. Sometimes you may feel anxiety or fear after making the choice, but this is because you're being vulnerable. You are... Oh, wow. Coyote just crossed the road right behind my car. It doesn't know I'm here. This may be the last moments of Dear Jackson, captured on camera for your pleasure. Scared it off. yeah, you may feel vulnerable after making a choice because you're putting up a boundary with someone, you're saying no, you're disappointing someone. So all of these might be natural responses as well. This brings to mind something else. Usually, after making the right choice for you, you will realize that either it's impossible to imagine yourself having made a different choice, or if you imagine yourself having made a different choice, it feels like you would be smaller. It feels like you would have sacrificed something paramount for you, something essential to you. So often about the most important choices for me, I feel a great deal of anxiety. Feels like I'm stepping too deeply into the unknown. And later I realized, if I had stayed where I was, if I had kept doing what I was doing, it wouldn't have been a representation of who I've grown into. And so I had to do this. After a choice that's in alignment with our true self, there's a sense of inevitability, a sense of course, this needed to happen. Sometimes, too, we may have cosmic reinforcements or affirmations of our choice. Let's say you move out of a location and immediately after there's a dangerous event there, like a flood or a shooting or something like that. Let's say you leave an organization and it closes. Let's say you choose not to date someone and soon thereafter, you learn something negative about them through your sphere of friends, some way you might have gotten hurt, been at risk. So all of these sorts of confirmations can arise too. As a converse of feeling anxiety-free after a choice, if you notice yourself going back to the choice, ruminating on it, feeling like, I'm not sure about that, that's a sign that perhaps it was out of tune with who you are, or that you acted rashly, or something to that effect. And if that's happening, my recommendation would be go back and begin the process anew. Check in with the body pendulum, make statements to yourself, see what is right for you to do in the present now that the past is written, now that the old choice is no longer available. And sometimes we could go back and renegotiate decisions we've already made. Hey, that was a little quick. I'm not sure I really meant that. Would you be open to discussing it again? If it's authentic, most people will respond positively. So I'm not thinking there's too much else I want to say on this topic. Thank you for listening, and I hope that these points, these strategies have been useful and illuminating for you. I'll just give a quick recap here. One, it's a fruitless enterprise to make choices solely from the faculty of the mind. Two, it's more trustworthy to appeal to our emotions and our instincts. And not only that, but when we do so, we will ultimately be doing what is moral, what is good, and what is right for us at the deepest level of our being. Three, the paradox of choosing in this way is that it means surrendering the belief that we are in control of our life. And four, we can use how we feel and what happens after a choice to assess its correctness for us. And based on our determination, we can then go back and renegotiate or choose again. So thank you very much for listening. Again, I hope that these methods, these strategies have been useful for you. And I hope you have a blessed day and a wonderful life. Goodbye.